You're listening to Impulse to Innovation. The Institution of Mechanical Engineers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Helen Mees. As a global community of mechanical engineers with over 120,000 members in 140 countries, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers has been at the heart of the engineering profession since 1847. The institution's mission is to improve the world through engineering by sharing the latest news, views and insight into the creative world of technology and the people that make it happen. Hello and welcome to the new season of Impulse to Innovation. Believe it or not, as of the end of December 2022, we have produced 30 episodes of the podcast. We've reached 98 countries and have had over 14,500 downloads. Thank you so much to you, our listeners, for continuing to support our show. We really do appreciate it. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show on our main site on Podbean, the link is in our episode notes, or via any podcast service you use. If you prefer, you can also listen to us on the IMechE's website via the newly embedded audio link on the homepage. We also love hearing from our listeners, so don't forget you can email us via podcast@imeche.org. Let us know what you think of the show, experiences that you want to share with us, or even give us some ideas of things that you might like to hear. We have some fascinating engineering topics planned for the coming year, including innovations in composite materials, how measurement standards are created and maintained, and of course, energy and transport issues. We will also be looking at the latest developments in education and skills for engineers, as well as the public perception of our own profession. And I am so looking forward to sharing some of the policy work our HQ team will be undertaking and the extensive events calendar planned by both our technical divisions and groups, as well as across our 16 regions. There's going to be something for everyone. In this month's episode, we kick off with a look at what the year ahead has in store for the IMechE, focusing on the institution's upcoming strategy release in May and its 2023 aspirations, as well as the role the Technical Strategy Board plays in ensuring the IMechE's members have a platform to share their latest thinking and expertise from its 18 divisions and groups. Today's guests are James Partington and Paul Jones. James is the newly appointed Director of Engineering Policy and Impact and joined the IMechE in October last year with the task of delivering the institution's impact strategy, ensuring members' engineering expertise is heard as wide as possible in government and broader communities. I started by asking James to share a little bit about himself and why a move from being a civil servant to a membership executive director was so appealing. Hi James and welcome to the I2I podcast. It is great to have you on the first episode of 2023.
Hi Helen, thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here.
As I said in my introduction, you took on the role of Director of Engineering Policy and Impact back in October of last year, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, today's actually 3 months in the role, so
Oh,
to
really?
the date, so it's quite exciting. Yeah, a bit of a landmark almost.
Yeah. Oh, well, we've timed it very well then. But before we kind of get into that side of things, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you interested in science and how has it led you to us here at the IMechE?
Yeah, thank you. What a great question to open with. So there's about 3 questions in one there, so maybe I'll try and split those out and answer them in turn. So something about me and what got me interested in science and how I got here. So I guess I'm so grooved with saying that I'm a civil servant, but I'm tricky to get out of that groove. But I should say that, I spent my last 13 years working in the civil service as a policy official and across a number of different roles, mostly around the business department. I did some work in what was UKTI, now Department of International Trade. and 3 years working in the Office for Low Emission Vehicles, which was part of Department of Transport, always located within. I don't know, people might be interested to hear about some of the stuff I did in those roles. I was responsible for the safe closure of the SSI steelworks in Redcar and Teesside, which had some quite interesting engineering challenges. I wasn't responsible for day-to-day boots on the ground, but it's more of like the strategic context of how we handled some of that stuff.
Yeah.
My most recent role, I was responsible for part of the science policy landscape. And I had 3.5 years with policy responsibility for nuclear fusion and what we were doing there. I know that's been in the headlines quite a bit recently.
Yeah.
Also held the government contracts with the Public Weather Service, with the Met Office, and the National Measurement System. I know we've got many of our members down at NPL site in Teddington, National Physical Laboratory, and we contracted them to deliver that. I was also responsible for our negotiations with the European Commission for Euratom research and training, and that sits alongside the Horizon programme and the Copernicus programme, so one of the 3 science programmes. I'm sure people will be interested in some of that.
Yeah.
And then finally, I had policy responsibility in this role for our governance of our membership of international research infrastructures. So things like CERN, European Spallation Source, in Lund, Sweden, which were in construction. So it's quite interesting to have sat on the governing council of those.
Wow.
And maybe more broadly about me, outside work, I'm married. I've got a 4-year-old son and a 19-month-old daughter, and they keep me pretty busy.
I can imagine.
And if and if after that I got any spare time, I try and play a bit of squash or go for a run, maybe even occasionally sneak out for a game of golf.
I'm surprised you find any time to do any sort of sports with all of that going on.
I don't do much these days, that's true.
But it's really great to hear that breadth of science engagement that you've been involved in, and it must have been quite interesting to work on different areas of science policy in that respect.
Yeah, very much so. It's fascinating, and I think you said what got me interested in science, and I was lucky to have a really broad science role across those different areas that I mentioned, and certainly I didn't do it all myself. I had a big team that helped me work on all those things.
Sure.
But I guess my training, as it were, my university degree is earth sciences, and that stemmed from growing up in Cornwall and having such fantastic geology on the doorstep, and the geography and the natural environment and outside, and being reasonably proficient at sciences and maths, I guess, and an interest in geography, kind of like natural evolution into earth sciences degree. And 8 years at university later, I'd probably say I was a geochemist, or probably more accurately, a paleoceanographer.
Wow.
So I'd studied a fair amount of strontium-calcium ratios, magnesium-calcium ratios to reconstruct ocean temperatures and things like that. But I didn't want to be an academic, but I kind of retained that real interest in science and that understanding of how things work. And I think that may be what led me through to real interest in engineering and the parallels. I can see a lot of parallels already with what I do and what I have done.
Yeah. What kind of got you thinking about coming to work with the IMechE? Because it is kind of a slight change in what you've been doing within government.
Yeah, I'd say it's similar but different. And I've always known of IMechE as an organisation. It's been on the doorstep. It's something that I and my colleagues have worked with IMechE before. Even last year, I came here and gave the policy update on fusion at the Fusion event, alongside the launch of the Fusion report. So it's certainly something that I've known about. I mentioned earlier about the negotiations with the European Commission. Alice used to work in the UK Space Agency. They were one of the organisations that I sponsored. I sat on the board and I worked closely with Alice. So I knew Alice. I've known the organisation. Alice is somebody I've kind of respected highly and always wanted to work with. And the organisation has been of interest to me, but I'd probably be honest to say I had no idea of the breadth and the depth of what the membership does, and I still feel like I'm just scratching the surface in terms of getting to know people and the amazing things that they get up to. The more I saw and understood about the role, the more I researched it, the more interested I got, and I guess by the end of the process, I was really keen for the job and very pleased I got it.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Yeah, it is one of those kind of Alice in Wonderland moments when you come into the IMechE. You never know what you're going to find next as to what the engineers are doing. And I've certainly had that experience coming into biomedical engineering. It was a whole Pandora's box of incredible technology and engineering. So I'm sure you're going to have a similar experience to what I've had as well.
It's really exciting. Engineers working on society's issues to come up with solutions that society needs that take us forward. If you can't get excited about this kind of thing, I don't know what you can get excited about. It's a really rewarding role, and I think having worked across a range of science policy and other government policies, is those ones where you feel like you've made a difference to society, and you've moved the world forward on the debate of policy issues or policy content. And I think this role is a really great opportunity to kind of live my personal values from a different perspective and bring those through to the role.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, being part of an exec team of an institution as big as the IMechE is obviously quite a challenge. And as you mentioned, you've been 3 months in the role as of today. So how's it been so far? And what have you found most interesting as you've been getting to know the place, the people, and some of the issues that the institution faces?
Yeah, 3 months, I can't believe the time's absolutely flown by. I was reflecting on this, and I'd say it's probably how easy it has been to fit into the role. And I say that from talking to members and working with members. And as I'm scratching the surface of getting to know the membership, I've met quite a few. I was lucky enough to have had the 175th celebration in Birmingham since I started, and it was a great way to meet a huge number of people from different divisions and groups and regions, and the international board as well, which I went to just before I joined, but meeting some of our international members as well. The staff and the wider stakeholders have been fantastic as well, and I should probably also say my team have been really great in bringing me up to speed. Some of the things from a policy perspective I've maybe landed more naturally, and other things like some of the challenges and the fantastic things we're doing in the library. I'm really delighted to have such expert team working here with me on some of the things that we're doing. So I'd say my main takeaway is how easy it's been to fit in and maybe bring some value from the policy perspective and hit the ground running on day one. Also, I mentioned earlier, just like the breadth, I got excited when I was applying for the role, but just even better understanding now I'm here, feet under the desk, of what people do. And I guess it's like one of the challenges to try and hear the views of the membership and have policy impact with that, and just think about how we structure and coordinate and organise what we do to make that as easy for members and ourselves to go away and think about how we can go and whether that's influenced the policy debate or the public debate on engineering issues.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of voices within the membership. They're all very keen to give their thoughts and opinions on not only how the institution should go forward, but informing society more broadly on the importance of engineering. So you're going to have your hands full, I know, from us members, but certainly from that point of view, we're all keen to really create opportunities to develop that kind of policy. So it's really nice to hear that you're really excited about that side. And also you talked there about the international members as well. And we're going to be having a show later on in the year from some of our international members on energy. I won't give too much away to our listeners now, but I'm really looking forward to hearing their viewpoints. And I think our international community very much wants to have a voice within some of the issues and challenges we're facing as engineers. So that's going to be something that you're obviously going to be able to dig into in the coming year as well.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. And you talk about the challenges as members wanting to come and talk to us on the policy side. That's a really nice problem to have, and I think that's a good problem in my book. And the international angle, having sat on, as I say, on the governing council of CERN and these other big science facilities, that's a really interesting dynamic. And maybe when you strip away the geopolitical angle that I had to deal with in government, you get a really strong desire for collaboration on science and engineering. And that's a really exciting thing too. And you can bring along a lot of best practice from different countries. And what we're doing well here, we can take that to other countries as well. So I'm quite excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, me too. I think this coming year is going to be very interesting. I think for the institution now, we're coming out of COVID, and I think people are getting back into that real drive to make change. So it's going to be a good year, I think, from that point of view.
Yeah, I hope so. I agree. It's nice to see people in the building and the facilities being used, and it's great just to come into the building and bump into members. Yeah. It's happening as I know more and more people. But if you're here, I'm in the building most days, so I'm always keen to see people and hear from people.
Oh well, we'll make sure that people know that you're there. It's probably not a good thing to tell them on the podcast. They'll all be round your office. Now, your previous role at BEIS covered domestic and international science policy, as you've already mentioned, and that was very much focused on nuclear fusion, and the Euratom Research and Training Science Programme was a key part of that role. The energy challenges we face globally are a big part of the IMechE's key strategic goals. So what areas of energy policy will you be focusing on this year, and what are you hoping that we can achieve in terms of wider impact in that area?
That's a really great and very difficult question. I think it's a really, really vast subject. I think it'd be all too easy for me to say fusion. I mean, I've got a real policy love for fusion, but we covered that last year in a great report. And if you haven't seen that, and the podcast as well, I think take a listen. Matt Rooney and my team produce an excellent report there, so do take a look at that. On things like this, I'm careful not to be drawn into a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to we're going to do this, that, and the other. And one of the things I quite like doing is putting a bit of process down. So one of the things we're doing, I mean, it's lucky at the start of the year, is mapping our policy work for 2023. This is a combination, I think, of the excellent bottom-up ideas from the membership. And I think the value add from our role is understanding the policy landscape. What topics are hot at the moment? What are ministers working on? What are the civil service policy officials working on and advising ministers on, and other stakeholders as well? I think our network and our trusted advice that we can provide from this team into those ministers and officials allows us to position our policy input well to have maximum impact. I mean, nobody wants to produce a report that sits on a shelf because it didn't quite hit the policy interest. So what we're doing, I mean, to talk around your question slightly, is to think about where the policy debate is going this year, and also where we have expertise and interest and members of volunteers when they're involved. So where's the interest in volunteers? So I think being able to navigate and plot that will give us a basis from which we can then come back and communicate to say this is where our priorities are and what we're going to do in terms of influencing the policy debate. I still haven't really answered your question, but I think I mean, if you're going to put me on the spot slightly, I'd say things like small modular reactors are really exciting. I see a lot of conversations happening inside, outside government about what is the UK's supply chain capability? What would we have to do in the UK to build out our expertise to allow us to deliver those? And that's maybe the kind of thing that I think we as an organisation are really well placed to take a considered view on some of the challenges. And the breadth of expertise within our membership can maybe bring through some of the thoughts on what we would like to see or need to see from a UK perspective to position ourselves to maximise our opportunity as a country as a whole.
Yeah.
Freezing cold temperatures at the moment, and some of the stuff that we've just seen in the news about asking people to turn off electrical appliances, energy efficiency and supply is a red hot topic in government. We've got the energy bill going through Parliament this year, and things like that I think are hooks for us to go and have maximum impact. And so thinking about what are the topics that they're going to be debating in the energy bill? Are there any areas where we have particular interest or expertise or things that we'd like to see? And then maybe feeding into those various debates. So there's also another example of how we might be able to engage in this topic through the course of the year. And then maybe finally, I probably can't sit here and not think about some of the upcoming reports that we've got in draft, but adapting to heat reports, maybe loosely tangential to the energy debate. But that's something we've got lined up to publish in spring. So watch this space, very exciting. And that will cover like the impact of heat on people, industrial equipment and buildings. Energy related to some extent, but I think that's quite an exciting thing as well.
Yes, it's certainly a long-term debate and discussion that not just our members, but more broadly society is going to be having for a long time. And I suppose from your point of view, there's the aspect of dealing with those long-term issues and developing policy from that point of view, but also dealing with the sort of the crises that maybe come up as well and being able to respond rapidly, giving government responses on our ideas as an engineering community. So you're having to balance both sides of that scale, aren't you, I suppose?
Yeah, and I mean, that's really interesting to reflect on that. And I think we've got a bit of a toolbox of tools if you want to think of how we can go and influence policy. And if it's a critical issue, you'd hope that that was a risk that was identified and there's a bit of a pre-prepared and pre-planned response. But if you're looking at building in some assurance around some of the assumptions or decisions, we can certainly get involved in that. And I think that's something where maybe our members can provide company impartial and really highly expert advice. If you're talking about building an evidence base for maybe some of that more longer term policy input, or if government's looking to consult either formally or informally, I think that's something we can do too, and we can draw on our membership and the expertise that sits within our membership to really think about how we can go about helping policy officials set out the evidence base and some of the challenges that we're facing now and into the future, and what role engineering can play to address and fix those challenges.
Yeah. Now, I know this is a little bit of an early question to ask you, but as engineering director, what are your aspirations for the institution as we're kind of heading out of our 175th anniversary year? And what can IMechE members look forward to seeing from you and the team in the short term?
You asked what it's like to be in a leadership role in an organization like IMechE, and I think it's hugely exciting and a real privilege to have this position. And maybe there's some really easy answers to your question, because the top headline deliverables of the organization are also my deliverables. So I can a bit of a cop-out answer, but the strategy that we've got coming out in a few months, and being the director with responsibility for thinking about impact and how we have impact, and we touched on some of that. That's something that's front and center of my mind, to make sure that we capture that appropriately and we set out a clear plan, and that's something we can then take to members with our intention, and that helps build out the day-to-day activities which you might set out in the business plan, and looking for a multi-year like a financial plan that can help set a bit of certainty and direction. So that's a bit of content without an absolute answer. We've also got a big decision on the building coming up, and that's looming. And so I hope all members are going to engage with that process, and there'll be more information coming out on that in the near future. But successfully navigating both of those, and then taking action off the back of the decisions that are taken and the documents that are produced, will also, I think, occupy quite a bit of our time. I talked a little bit about the policy process and prioritization work that we're doing. Once we get that down on paper, I'd like to put that out to members so they can see and understand what we're doing. We can have a bit of a schedule through the year. The big ticket events, our prestige lectures, our reports that we're going to have coming out alongside those, and how people can get involved and offer their time and their expertise, and we can draw that out of our membership as best as possible. And I guess alongside this, I talked a little bit about getting to know stakeholders, and I found myself reflecting over the last few days. There's the African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Yeah. And I'm quite aware, more so than I ever was before joining, the number of engineering institutions, the PEIs, and on some issues we've got real common ground, and I think that's a great place to go and stand alongside one another and have a stronger voice. And it's very easy when you're in government, when people have a united voice that are all saying the same thing with a good evidence base, to then take action. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do alongside those and other key stakeholders, the Engineering Policy Centre, which will help us really have impact of what we're trying to do from a policy perspective, and I guess be integral to the engineering policy ecosystem.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't leave here without plugging some of the work that we're doing on our library and our digital services.
Yeah.
So I know many of our members do use the library, maybe less so taking out hard copies of books, but certainly the library's online, and do take a look. It's a fantastic facility for members, and we're working hard with our digital offer there. So watch this space. And I guess lastly, I've just been having a fantastic conversation today with Helen James. It's on my mind about what we're doing on education, outreach, and skills. And I know a huge number of our members spend a lot of time doing outreach work, and it's very rewarding. And just thinking about what we can do on the education policy and skills landscape as well, with T-levels and a huge amount of work coming through. So just wrapping my head around the opportunities and what we can bring to that part of the policy debate as well. That's something really exciting, and I'm hoping that we can do a bit more in terms of setting out what our offer is and how we can go and have impact. And finally, before I forget, I wanted to mention PE Magazine. I know it's a fantastic document that many members enjoy reading. We'll also have plans to go digital and more digital in the organisation. So I'd quite like to trial a digital version of PE Magazine. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts. I'd be interested in hearing what would work well. I guess there's an open invite for some feedback to come back to me. But I think that's something that we should certainly trial, and that will help broaden our offer to international members and provide content that maybe we weren't able to provide in a hard copy. So I think that's quite an exciting opportunity as well. So a few things, or maybe quite a few things that on my to-do list as I look through into 2023.
Yeah, that's quite a busy schedule there, James, I think. Yeah, that sounds really exciting to have another digital offering, and it's certainly the way that a lot of people now are looking to get their information. That's why we started the podcast. And indeed, you inadvertently touched on a few of the subjects that we may be doing as shows throughout the podcast year as well there. So I'm quite excited to explore some of those, particularly the education. You talked about T-levels, and that's an area I'm quite fascinated by. So we may have to talk to Helen James, bring her on the show, maybe to talk about that subject. So it sounds like you've got quite a busy but very focused year ahead. It sounds like you're going to have plenty of things to do and get the members involved in as well, which is great.
Yeah, I'm really relishing the opportunity to do that. And as I say, I'm getting to know more and more members. The tricky thing is you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know which members hold fantastic levels of knowledge or expertise on issues. And I think the big trick is almost finding how we can access member, I guess, time and expertise and pull that into some of the work that we're doing, so we can represent the broad view of members and pull it out. Yeah, it's quite an exciting forward look. I mean, some big challenges there, certainly, but I think that's the kind of thing that motivates me, and I can see like a nice path through, and maybe we can review and reflect at the start of 2024 and see how we've progressed against all of those things.
Oh, we'll definitely have you back on the show, that's for sure. And we obviously have our email address. It's podcast@imeche.org. So anybody listening to the show will be able to drop us a line, as many members do, and we can always pass that on to you, James, if there's ideas and suggestions coming from the members.
Yeah, always keen to hear them. So thank you very much.
James, thank you ever so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure and great to hear your enthusiasm for this new role that you're taking on. We wish you all the best of luck through the coming year, and also look forward to seeing some of the output from the policy team as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Paul Jones is a Fellow of the institution, past chair of the Automotive Division, and is presently the chair of the Technical Strategy Board, one of the 7 operational boards which provides insight and guidance to the trustees. I had Paul on the podcast this time last year, and I wanted to catch up with him to get his thoughts on the past year of events and happenings in the divisions and groups, as well as to discuss the vital work being carried out by the TSB members in creating a long-term plan to raise the voice of mechanical engineering and generate greater impact in society. Paul and I started off by looking back over 2022. Paul, welcome to I2I. It is a pleasure to have you on the show again. 2022 was a rather busy year for the IMechE, wasn't it, with its 175th anniversary. What were the outstanding events or happenings for you, and what impact do you think they had or will have on members going into the new year?
Well, hi, Helen. Likewise, always a pleasure to speak with you, and thanks again for the opportunity to participate today. You're right. Really busy year, in terms of highlights. Of course, the 175th anniversary of the institution, and we had a wonderful event in the Central Library in Birmingham, which was very, very memorable. So that's certainly one of the standout events for me. But really busy on the sort of policy front as well. So, some of the things the technical strategy board's been involved in, contributions to the chief medical officer, Sir Chris Whitty's report on air pollution. I think you were involved yourself, Helen.
I was.
And certainly Andrew Fraser, chair of the Automobile Division Board, was involved too. So it's great to be getting the IMechE and the world of engineering's voice right up there with these key stakeholders in government. Peter Flynn's report on net zero, which we prepared for COP27, again, a standout piece of work. And for me, thinking about other involvement we had with government, which has been highlights for me this year, a technical strategy board contributed to the roundtable event with Chris Skidmore, which contributed to his net zero review, which, as we know, was published late last year. And we also hosted a parliamentary and scientific committee event at Westminster in October, and that was a really great opportunity to get to the heart of government, and that was about the role of engineers in achieving net zero. So I like to think we've had quite a strong voice over the last 12 months on some key global challenges and topics going forward.
Yeah, well, the focus there has been very much on the sustainability, on climate change, on net zero. And I think that's a big focus for us as an institution, not just in the past 12 months, but going forward. And I'm guessing we'll come to talk about that shortly. But I also, I missed out on the anniversary dinner, which was a pretty sad thing. But it sounds like it was a fantastic way to finish off what is and has been a really special year for the institution. So it's great to hear all of those things that have been going on and all of the impact that members have had over the last 12 months. Now, as chair of the Technical Strategy Board, it's your job to oversee the work of 18 divisions and groups. Am I right there?
That's correct. 18, that's right.
I mean, it's a big task. Let's not make this, anything that it isn't. It is a big task for you. How do you ensure all of these specialisms get a voice and can represent their industry sectors through the work that TSB does?
So, Helen, you're right. It's a big task, but it's an exciting task. It's a task I relish. The Technical Strategy Board is the sort of engineering powerhouse of the institution. So you're quite right. It's a coming together of the 18 divisions and groups. And if you look at our sort of strategic priorities going forward, you mentioned sustainability, so climate and sustainability, future transport, a particular favourite of mine, having spent over 30 years in the automotive sector. We've got infectious disease control, which I know is one which is close to your heart.
Yeah.
And we've got education. All of these are complex, interdisciplinary challenges going forward. So by default, we're involving all the divisions and groups in this. You take future transport, you can't just say, well, this is the automobile division. We've got railway division, we've got aerospace. So we've got multiple inputs into these. So I think it almost comes by default. Yeah, in your daily job that engineering challenges are complex, interdisciplinary challenges, if you like.
Yeah, you mentioned there about the cross-cutting nature of some of that work and how the relationship between the divisions and groups is very much, although they have their specialisms, they're very much joined together, aren't they? I know I'm working with other divisions and groups at the moment to plan for a policy statement, for example. So there's a lot involved in bringing those groups together and finding common ground, I suppose, to be able to communicate some of the ideas that the institution has.
You're right, and you mentioned policy, and obviously that's a big part of the Technical Strategy Board's work. I mean, you can say we're responsible for the technical output of the institution, and that sort of basically boils down into events and into policy. And we talked about a number of policy items just earlier. So I think let's talk a little bit about impact. You mentioned the word impact, and you and I have both had the privilege last year, have been involved in the sort of formulation of the institution's impact strategy.
Yeah.
And you know that sort of fits into the bigger 2030 vision of the institution. It's sort of mission, strategic goals, and values. So we talked about I2I earlier. Well, let's talk about the 4 I's maybe. Inclusion, integrity, impact, and innovation. So if we come back to impact, we want to maximize the impact of our members in promoting engineering, informing opinion, and stimulating innovation for the benefit of society. So that's something we've been working hard at this year. And, we've had great help. I mean, fantastic news with the appointment of James Partington as Director of Engineering Impact and Policy. And that's going to really give us some additional momentum now in terms of going forward with this agenda.
Yeah, and obviously we've talked to James on the show earlier. We've got a real sense of the direction that he wants to take the institution strategy, and obviously as members we're right behind him on that. Now, the TSB has been heavily involved in creating the institution's new strategic plans going forward. And you just mentioned it there briefly, that we've both been involved in our various roles with the institution in that. And that's going to be finalised in the coming months, and I believe it's something that we're aiming for in May as a release.
That's right.
How important is it to the institution as a whole, and what do you hope will be the long-term effect of that strategy on the way that mechanical engineering is perceived, particularly?
Well, I think, Helen, you and I both know through our daytime jobs over the years, strategy is key to any organization.
Yeah.
Everything cascades from the strategy. It runs right through the whole organization. It sort of shapes the way you organize yourself. It shapes your priorities. It shapes how you go about delivery. So for me, to have finalized sort of strategy published, as you say, in the second quarter of this year, that's just really giving the institution some really clear direction. And not just for those who are members, but for people who interface with us as well. They can see that we've got sort of clear strategic goals and priorities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point as well, Paul, isn't it? That this is not just about us as an engineering community, but it's about our impact and the perception that people have outside of engineering and what we bring to the table and the voice that we bring and how we can change and how we do change the world through engineering. What value do you think this development of this new strategy will have in terms of engaging with a wider public who are not necessarily aware about what engineers do?
That's a good question. Clearly, there are some big challenges out there, and it's engineers who are going to fix some of these challenges. We look at things like climate change, for example, and it will be engineers that help sort of find solutions to those issues. And I think if the outside world can see sort of our clear strategy, our clear focus going forward, then it will help in their sort of interactions with us. And you're right. We do want to improve the world through engineering, and we need to get our message out there to the sort of the general public, and more importantly to the policymakers, to the likes of government. Some of the examples I mentioned earlier during our conversation.
Yeah, indeed. From a grassroots point of view, our members going out and talking in schools and at presentations and being part of that kind of community is where we will really drive that agenda and that change over the long term, I suppose, which is a good thing.
You're absolutely right, Helen. And we're an organisation of 100,000 plus members. And you mentioned earlier the technical strategy board and the 18 divisions and groups, and that just shows the absolute breadth we've got in terms of sort of expertise amongst our membership. If you're looking at sort of maybe low carbon energy generation or transport for the future, we kind of stem the whole thing from the sort of the power generation at one end to designing the vehicles, for example, to consume that power to the end user. We span the whole spectrum.
Yeah, and it's something that goes invisibly on in the world. I'm very surprised how invisible engineering still is, even in today's environment of digital and all of the other things that are going on. But hey, we keep going, we keep doing what we do, and that's the most important thing.
I think it's visible. It's certainly not. I know what you mean, but it's certainly not invisible. It's visible, but maybe people just take it for granted.
Yes.
Sometimes, because these solutions are around us in our daily life, in everything we do, the food we eat, the houses we live in, the transportation we use to get to work, etc. So it's all around, but people just take it for granted sometimes. I don't think they sort of join the dots.
Yeah.
And our job's
true.
help them join those dots.
Most definitely. And I think we're both very passionate about doing that as well, which is why we're here
Certainly
talking.
are.
Now, we have some great events, conferences and policy pieces planned for this year across all the divisions and groups. And I've been hearing some of that from James and also from our team at HQ, Matt Rooney and his team. What areas of technical interest should our listeners be looking out for this year? What things are kind of piquing your interest and the interest of our members?
Well, you're right, Helen. We've got a busy programme. We've been working, as you know, sort of hard with Rob Porter and the events team.
Yeah.
And you'll see a sort of number of key events this year. But again, they principally revolve around the sort of key strategic priorities that we talked about earlier. So climate and sustainability, future transport, infectious disease control, education. Some of the highlights for me, I guess, if I'm allowed to sort of look at my own division, automobile, EV batteries. EV batteries is turning into sort of a really big event, bringing together a huge community. Because as we know, batteries are crucial to transport and our drive towards net zero. So I had the pleasure of chairing one day of the 2-day conference we did at Silverstone late last year, and we will be repeating that conference again this year. So certainly that's one of the highlights for me, and something to look out for as a community.
Well, one of our very first shows actually on the podcast was on the EV conference, and of course we had the wonderful Robert Llewellyn who came on to talk about his work and his drive to change people's thoughts on EV. So it'll be interesting 2 years on to know more about what's going on. And in fact, we do have a show planned on electric vehicles this year. So I'm quite excited to find out what's going on, and particularly what's happened at the conference. So it might be nice to speak to some of the attendees who are going to be taking part in that to find out what's getting them excited. I know from what I've been hearing of some of the conferences, I'm very excited about the incontinence conference. Believe it or not, for our listeners, we do talk about incontinence in mechanical engineering, but actually their focus apparently this year is on sustainability as well, and how can we create sustainable products for patients in the long term. So we cover a whole range of stuff, don't we, Paul? I mean, in terms of cars at one end to patient products at the other, there's a whole plethora of things that we're going to be covering.
Oh, I think so, Helen. And, you sort of touched on an area which is close to you there with healthcare. And, we talk about, maybe the role of engineering not being that visible. And, we don't have to go back very far, do we? Just over 2 years ago with the vaccine rollout. And again, the scientists did a fantastic job developing these COVID-19 vaccines in an unprecedented short period of time. But actually, in terms of the ramp up of vaccine production and distribution, that was down to engineers. Play a key role in every part of society.
Yeah. Well, Paul, I don't know about you, but I'm really quite excited now about not only the shows that we've got ahead, which I've talked about in my introduction, but also the things that are going on behind the scenes as well with our members and the things that they're taking part. So I'm really excited to find out more about what's going on this year. And obviously, we will keep our listeners up to date with the goings on at TSB. So as always, Paul, thank you very much for joining me and giving me an insight into what's happening in this coming year. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.
Helen, always a pleasure. I mean, I think, as you said, it's a really exciting time to be involved in the world of engineering, and to be part of that is such a privilege. So thank you again for the opportunity of speaking with you today.
That's all for this month. In next month's show, we will be examining how the manufacturing industry is withstanding the disruption left behind by the COVID epidemic and the resulting global economic and societal impacts it has had. We will be focusing on the growing interest in distributed manufacturing and how companies big and small, are integrating this approach into their business processes and strategies. You've been listening to Impulse to Innovation, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear from you, so if you'd like to share any news or any feedback with us, then please email us, podcast@IMechE's.org. All the information on this episode can be found in the episode notes.